Struggling with fatigue, memory lapses, concentration issues, or even mood swings? You might be surprised to learn that gluten could be silently sabotaging your brain health. Hi, I'm Dr. Lexi Watson, a functional medicine practitioner specializing in brain health and cellular healing. Today I'll be diving into the often overlooked connection between gluten, a protein found in everyday foods, and your brain. And much of what I'll be exploring today comes from the research of two leading experts in this field, Dr. David Perlmutter, author of Grain Brain, and Dr. Dale Bredesen, author of The End of Alzheimer's. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second. Gluten is in things like bread and pasta, right? How could it possibly affect my brain? And that's exactly what I'm going to uncover today. So if you've been dealing with memory lapses, brain fog, constant fatigue, or even just a general feeling of being off, I want you to know that you're not alone. Many people, especially as they enter midlife and get older, struggle with these issues, and they can be incredibly frustrating. But what if gluten, something many of us consume on a daily basis, was playing a hidden role in all of this? Now, understanding this connection could be a game changer for you. So I'm going to look at the science, break it down in a way that makes sense, and help you make informed decisions that could radically improve your brain health and energy levels. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is gluten? Gluten is a protein made up of two main components, glutenins and gliadins or gliadins. You'll find these proteins in grains like wheat, barley, and rye. Now, gluten is what gives dough its elasticity and that chewy texture we all know and love in bread. But as harmless as gluten might seem, for many people, it can wreak havoc on their health, especially their brain. Now, here's the tricky part. Gluten is everywhere in our modern diets. It's not just in bread and pasta. Gluten can be found in so many processed foods, sauces, seasonings, and even things like salad dressings. And believe it or not, it's even in the chicken marinade of Chick-fil-A's grilled chicken. It's seriously hiding in places you wouldn't expect, which makes avoiding it harder than it sounds. And this brings me to an important distinction: celiac disease versus non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder. When people with celiac disease eat gluten, their immune system goes completely berserk, specifically targeting and attacking their intestines. It's a serious condition that can lead to severe digestive issues and malnutrition if untreated. But here's where things get interesting. You don't have to have celiac disease to experience negative effects from gluten. There's something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and while it's not as well known, it can be just as disruptive, especially to your brain. Dr. Perlmutter points out in Grain Brain that people with gluten sensitivity might not even have noticeable digestive issues at all. Instead, the symptoms can show up in the brain, such as brain fog, memory problems, fatigue, and mood swings. This is why gluten sensitivity can be so hard to diagnose, because it doesn't always present how we would expect. So how do you know if gluten might be a problem for you? The symptoms of gluten sensitivity can show up in so many different ways, especially when it comes to brain and neurological health. But some of the most common symptoms include brain fog, that feeling of being mentally sluggish, unable to concentrate, or forgetful; ADHD, which can affect focus and behavior, especially in children but also in adults; anxiety and depression, mood disorders that can be tied to inflammation in the brain; migraines and persistent headaches; fatigue and constant low energy even after a full night's sleep; more serious neurological conditions like ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and schizophrenia, all of which have been linked in some way to gluten and inflammation; autoimmune disorders where the body attacks its own tissues like Hashimoto's thyroiditis or multiple sclerosis; ataxia, which affects balance and coordination; and even more unexplained issues like infertility, osteoporosis, heart disease, and cancer. It's a long list, right? And it's not just limited to the brain. People with gluten sensitivity can experience digestive disturbances like IBS, skin reactions like hives, and even sugar cravings. And it's this wide range of symptoms that makes gluten sensitivity so tricky to identify. It's not always obvious, and it doesn't affect everyone in the same way. But if you're experiencing any of these symptoms, especially if they're paired with cognitive issues, it could be worth exploring whether gluten might be playing a role for you. So now that we understand what gluten is, as well as some signs that gluten might be an issue for you, let's dive into how gluten actually impacts your brain. And one of the ways gluten causes problems is by interfering with your body's ability to absorb nutrients. Gluten is sticky, So when you consume foods containing gluten, that stickiness can disrupt the breakdown and absorption of key nutrients like vitamins and minerals in your digestive system. And when your brain isn't getting the nutrients it needs, things like magnesium, vitamin D, and omega-3s, it can really start to struggle. This is one reason why many people experience brain fog, memory lapses, and even cognitive decline when gluten is a regular part of their diet. But it doesn't stop there. Gluten can also trigger something called autoimmunity. Gluten contains that protein I mentioned earlier called gliadin or gliadin, and in some people, the body mistakenly identifies gliadin as a harmful invader, launching an immune response. What's really fascinating and concerning is that there are proteins in the brain that look very similar to gliadin. So when your body creates antibodies to attack gluten, those same antibodies can sometimes go after your brain proteins by mistake. And this is one mechanism that can lead to neuroinflammation, which is inflammation in your brain, contributing to issues like Alzheimer's, dementia, and other neurological disorders. It's a bit like friendly fire. Your body is trying to protect you from what it thinks is a harmful substance, but in the process, it's accidentally attacking the very thing you need to protect, your brain. Another major issue with gluten is its ability to trigger something called leaky gut, which can have a huge impact on both your body and your brain. When you eat gluten, the gliadin protein in gluten triggers the production of a molecule called zonulin. Zonulin is responsible for regulating the tight junctions in your gut lining, essentially the gatekeepers that decide what gets in and what stays out of your bloodstream. But when zonulin levels rise, those tight junctions loosen up, and this is where the trouble starts. As these gaps in your gut lining form, things like toxins, bacteria, and undigested food particles can escape into your bloodstream, something we call leaky gut. This triggers a widespread immune response and inflammation. But here's the kicker. This inflammation doesn't just stay in your gut. It spreads throughout your body and can reach your brain. And both Dr. Bredesen and Dr. Perlmutter emphasize the connection between leaky gut and leaky brain. When your gut barrier is compromised, it creates inflammation that can weaken your blood-brain barrier, making it easier for inflammatory molecules to cross that barrier as well. This barrier is supposed to protect your brain from harmful substances, but when it's weakened, those inflammatory molecules can slip through, causing brain inflammation and contributing to cognitive issues like brain fog, memory loss, and even more serious conditions like Alzheimer's. So, in a sense, a damaged gut lining can directly lead to a damaged brain, one of the many reasons why gut health is so critical to overall brain health, and is something I'll be touching on in more detail in some upcoming videos. Okay, now let's talk about something really fascinating and a little alarming: gluteomorphins. When gluten is broken down during digestion, it also produces a byproduct called gluteomorphins. What's interesting about these molecules is that they can cross the blood-brain barrier and bind to morphine receptors in your brain, the same receptors that drugs like morphine and heroin target. The binding creates a kind of high, which can be mildly addictive, and this is one reason why we feel a strong craving for foods containing gluten, like bread, pasta, and processed snacks. But it gets more interesting. This is also why big food companies often use gluten in their products. It helps create that satisfying, addictive quality that keeps us coming back for more and increases their bottom line. So it's not just the texture or taste that makes gluten-containing foods so appealing, it's a chemical reaction happening in your brain. And if that wasn't enough, gluten, especially in wheat, also causes significant blood sugar spikes. In fact, gluten-containing foods can spike your blood sugar even more than table sugar. Every time your blood sugar spikes, your body releases insulin to bring it back down, and over time, this constant cycle can lead to insulin resistance. And insulin resistance doesn't just affect your physical health, it's one of the major contributors to cognitive decline. According to Dr. Perlmutter and Dr. Bredesen, this blood sugar roller coaster can damage brain cells, increase inflammation, and accelerate the progression of conditions like Alzheimer's. So now that we've covered the impact of gluten on your brain, you're probably wondering, what can you actually do about it? The first and most straightforward step is to start by avoiding gluten. If you're experiencing symptoms like brain fog, fatigue, or any of the cognitive issues we've discussed, cutting out gluten from your diet can be a powerful experiment. Here's how you can get started. First, focus on whole anti-inflammatory foods. Choose fresh, unprocessed foods that naturally don't contain gluten, like vegetables, fruits, healthy fats, think avocados and olive oil, and clean proteins like grass-fed meats and wild-caught fish. These foods provide the nutrients your brain needs without triggering inflammation. To learn more about some of the best foods for your brain, watch this video right here. Number 2, be cautious with processed foods. Processed foods are often loaded with gluten because, as I mentioned earlier, it's used to enhance texture and flavor. Instead, opt for minimally processed options or make meals from scratch when possible. They don't have to take long or be complicated. And if you need to rely on a processed item, look for a gluten-free label or go to number 3 and read the label very carefully. And that brings me to number 3, reading labels carefully. Gluten hides in so many processed foods, things like sauces, soups, seasonings, and even salad dressings. So start by reading the labels on everything and be cautious of anything that lists wheat, barley, or rye as ingredients. Even oats, which are naturally gluten-free, can often be contaminated with gluten during processing. Some other names to look out for include malt, bulgur, couscous, spelt, wheat or barley grass, that will be cross-contaminated, and wheat germ oil or extract that will also be cross-contaminated. Please also be aware that other ingredients can but don't always come from gluten-containing grains, including hydrolyzed vegetable protein, modified food starch, natural and artificial flavors, dextrin and maltodextrin, and caramel color. And keep in mind that companies can change their ingredients at any time, so I'd recommend checking the label with each purchase. Number 4, use gluten-free alternatives. Thankfully, there are many gluten-free alternatives available today, although please be careful. Just because something says gluten-free doesn't mean it's healthy or good for your brain. That being said, for bread, I recommend trying brands like Against the Grain or Base Culture, which offer a variety of gluten-free breads with really clean ingredients that mimic the texture and taste of traditional bread. You can also experiment with making your own, which is what I like to do. My favorite resource is a cookbook called Keto Breads. Their hamburger buns were one of the first things my husband and I tried, and we love them. So if you want to check it out, it would be super helpful for me if you'd use my affiliate link in the description below. Now for pasta, brands like Banza or Banza, however you say it, and Miracle Noodle make gluten-free pastas, one out of lentils and one out of konjac root. But another great way to mimic pasta is spiralizing veggies like zucchini or carrots, or using spaghetti squash. A few other substitutes I found to be really helpful include arrowroot starch as a sauce thickener, almond flour as breadcrumbs, and gluten-free flour blends like Bob's Red Mill if I'm really wanting to bake something special. And last but not least, especially on a game day, I love some buffalo chicken dip with crackers, and Simple Mills makes the most delicious gluten-free crackers I've had yet. So I'd encourage you to give them a try. I'll link all of these product recommendations below. And again, it would be super helpful for me if you wanted to check them out if you'd use my affiliate links. Now, of course, removing gluten is just one piece of the puzzle. Both Dr. Perlmutter and Dr. Bredesen recommend other dietary changes that can significantly improve your brain health. This is something I focus on very heavily in my program, and one of the big ones is moving towards a low-carb or mildly ketogenic diet. This kind of eating plan can help stabilize your blood sugar levels and reduce the insulin resistance I talked about earlier, which is key for protecting your brain from cognitive decline. For more information on exactly how to eat for your best brain yet, watch this video right here. And I'd like to gift you a free cheat sheet on how to get started as well. Simply use the link in the description below to download my guide on the top 3 things you can do to banish the brain fog today. If you found this video interesting and helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're really serious about improving your brain health and energy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.